What would you do if you had one of the most secure jobs in America and you still felt stuck? In the federal government, we're conditioned to value the secure path above everything else. You're told that if you put in your 30 years, you'll be rewarded with a pension and a quiet retirement. But for most of the people I've worked with, that security felt more like a slow motion cage. They were trading their best years, their health, their energy, and their presence for a maybe at age 60. All right, I'm Jovan. I spent 12 years in the federal government. I didn't start at the top. I started by loading bags for American Airlines on the tarmac. I worked my way into TSA, climbed the ranks to supervisor, and eventually landed at the Pentagon as a federal police officer. By every traditional standard, I had made it. I had the benefits, the stability, and the Pentagon name on my resume, and I walked away from all of it. Now, I didn't leave because I was angry or because I was impulsive. I left because I built a protocol. I built an Airbnb business that scaled to 19 units and replaced my federal salary in just 15 months. I'm about to tell you exactly how that happened, the failures I had to survive first, and why I'd make the same calculated decision again tomorrow. To understand why I walked away from the Pentagon, you have to understand how I was wired from the very beginning. I grew up in Brooklyn and Queens in New York City as the oldest of three. I was raised by both my parents in a household where hard work wasn't a suggestion, it was the baseline. But I wasn't a rebel kid in the traditional sense. I wasn't out there breaking rules just to break them. In school, I could have easily been an A+ student. The work wasn't the problem. The logic was. I was the kid who always asked, why? If a teacher gave me an assignment, I didn't just want the grade. I wanted to know how the specific task translated to the real world result. If the answer was just because the syllabus says so, well, I lost interest immediately. I wasn't looking for a shortcut, I was looking for a return on the investment. Even at 10 years old, I was auditing the systems around me. I think that's a trait that a lot of you might have too. You're likely in a corporate or government role where you're surrounded by rules that just doesn't make any sense. You see the inefficiencies. You see the "we've always done it this way" mentality, and it eats at you because you're looking for a path that actually leads somewhere worth going. I realized early on that I wasn't built to follow a protocol that I didn't design myself. And when it came time for the biggest traditional milestone, which is college, I applied that same logic. And that's when I made my first major pivot. When I was 18, I followed the default protocol. I enrolled in a state college that offered a bachelor's degree and a professional pilot program wrapped all into one. On paper, it looked like the ultimate high leverage path. I thought I had found a way to bypass the standard 9 to 5 by entering a high prestige, high skill industry. But as I moved through the program, I stopped looking at the dream and started looking at the industry timeline with an auditor's lens. I realized that getting the licenses was actually the easiest part. The real barrier to entry in aviation isn't your skill, it's your hours. Even after you finish your degree and secure your licenses, you're essentially at zero. To even be considered for a commercial seat, you have to build a massive amount of flight time. And the way most people did that was by becoming a flight instructor. That meant years of working for a low hourly wage, barely covering your cost of living, just to collect the data points required to reach the next level. And the next level was another trap. Once you finally had the hours, you'd apply for a regional airline. You know, the smaller jets like American Eagle or United Express. But the life of a regional pilot isn't what you imagine. You're on call constantly. You have zero control over your schedule. And your pay is restricted by a guarantee of only 80 hours a month. If you aren't in the air, you aren't earning. I looked at the math of that career trajectory. It would take a decade of grinding at the regional level, being on call and underpaid, just to be lucky enough to get an interview with a major airline. Then, once you're there, you spend even more years as a first officer, waiting for someone else to retire so that you can move up the seniority list to captain. I looked at that 15-year roadmap and I fired the asset. It was another slow motion treadmill. I wasn't gonna spend half of my life waiting for a lifestyle that I wanted now. I realized that the traditional education and aviation systems were legacy systems. They were slow, they were expensive, and they were designed to keep you waiting. I needed a plan that actually generated cash flow without requiring 15 years of building hours. So I entered the workforce. I started at the bottom. My first real job was on the tarmac at the airport, ironically loading bags for American Eagle, which is the same regional carrier we just mentioned. It was physical and it was a grueling work in the heat and in the cold, but it got me inside the system. From there, I transitioned into the federal government. I started as a TSA officer. I applied the same discipline that I learned in Brooklyn. I mastered the protocols, I focused on the data, and I executed. I was promoted to lead after a few years, and then to supervisor. I was climbing the ladder exactly the way the system tells you to. Eventually, I landed what most people consider the end game, a position as a federal police officer at the Pentagon. I spent a total of 12 years in the federal government world. When you work at the Pentagon, you're surrounded by the pension mentality. It's a specific type of psychological trap. You're surrounded by people who are essentially zombies for 30 years. They aren't working for the mission. They're working for the countdown. They talk about their retirement dates like they're talking about a release date from prison or something. They'll say things like, I've only got 18 years left, or I'm 12 years away from my full benefits. They are willing to trade the best years of their life, their health, their energy, and their presence with their families for a guaranteed check when they're like 62 or even 65 years old. Now, I understood the logic of it. Stability is addictive, but I started looking at my superiors, people who have been there for 20 plus years. Yeah, they had the security, but they were stressed, they were trapped in bureaucracy, and they had zero control over their own time. They had reached the ceiling, and the ceiling was actually a cage. I realized that security is just a polite word for capped life. In the federal government, you are a line item in a budget that you don't even get to control. If the agency shifts, your life shifts. Think about it. How secure is your stable job when a group of politicians in a room can't agree on a budget and suddenly your paycheck is delayed indefinitely while you're still expected to show up for your shift? That's not job security. That's a hostage situation. Now, I was 12 years in, sitting in a patrol car, looking at the Pentagon building, and I realized I don't want to be 60 years old before I get to start living. I didn't want a pension. I wanted an empire, but I didn't just quit because honestly, that would be emotional. I started testing other vehicles. I started looking for a machine that can generate more revenue than the government was paying me without requiring 30 years of my life. And that search led me through a graveyard of failures before I finally found the one that worked for me. Before the 19 units, before the Pentagon exit, I was exactly where many of you are probably right now. I was a side hustle tourist. I spent years trying to find the magic pill that would let me walk away from the federal government. I was looking for a vehicle, but I kept choosing toys instead of machines. I built what I call the side hustle graveyard. I tried Amazon FBA, managing inventory and fighting for pennies in a race to the bottom. I even tried drop shipping, which is essentially being an unpaid marketing intern for a factory over in China. It was all noise. I even tried to trade stocks. I'd be at my desk at the Pentagon trying to watch charts on a screen while I was supposed to be monitoring security protocols. I was trading like a retail gambler, not an institutional professional. I didn't understand position management. I really just wanted to get lucky. Then I got into Toro. Now, let's look at the facts. I got lucky with the timing. I bought my cars during COVID, right before the used car market went insane. Because I bought low, I was seeing a decent return, but my auditor's brain told me that this really wasn't sustainable. It was a market bubble, not a structural business. I made the calculated decision to sell the entire fleet in 2023 before the inevitable depreciation hit and wiped out my margins. If I were to ever touch that industry again, I'd definitely do it differently. I'd use cheap cash cars to de-risk the capital. But the real issue with Turo wasn't just the math, it was a total lack of control. I was dealing with assets being totaled, cars being stolen, and customers who basically, they had zero respect for my property. I'd had people returning cars hours late, which meant my entire schedule was dictated by someone else's lack of discipline. I was making cash, but I was a slave to the asset. I hadn't built a bridge. I had just bought myself a high-stress, part-time job. I had to fail at all of those to realize that I didn't need a hustle. I needed a business with high leverage, high control, and low depreciation. The shift happened by accident in the Washington, D.C. area. It wasn't some grand strategic plan at first. It was a problem that needed a solution. My cousin and I had bought a property together, but as life moved on, the situation changed. Suddenly, I was the managing director of an empty house and a mortgage that was very much active. I was staring at a monthly bill for a property that was doing nothing but potentially costing me money. At that point, I didn't have the Rent with Jovan community. I didn't have the showroom quality standards that I preach now. I didn't even have a guest communication protocol. I was just a guy with an empty house and a desperate need to stop the bleeding before it impacted my credit and my W-2 stability. I put the house on Airbnb with zero market research. I didn't know about the seasonal demand or the cleaning fee spreads. I just wanted to cover the sub $2,000 mortgage. Now that first month changed the trajectory of my entire life. The revenue hit $5,000. I sat down and looked at the numbers. $5,000 in, $2,000 out. A $3,000 net spread. Now again, let's look at the facts. Part of that was luck. It was the height of post-COVID revenge travel, and the market was hungry. But while most people would have spent that extra $3,000 on vacation or a new car, I looked at it as a data point. The math didn't lie. If one accidental property could generate $3,000 in profit, then the pension trap at the Pentagon was no longer the only logical option. My mindset shifted from how do I survive this job to how many units do I really need to replace this job? I realized that Airbnb wasn't just a place to list a spare room. It was a high leverage vehicle that allowed me to control a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio without having to own the debt or wait 30 years for a deed. That accidental start was the first brick in the bridge. I had finally found the machine that worked, and now I just needed to figure out how to build the protocol to scale it. Once the math from that first property was clear, the logic dictated the next move, scaling up. But I want to be direct about how this happened. It wasn't a miracle. It was a sequence of data points. So I started in November 2022 with that very first unit. At that point, I was still a student of the game, but I made a critical decision that most people miss. I built initially for 50 units even while I only had one. I put a PMS, which is a property management software, in place from the start. And even at unit 1, I wasn't pricing things myself. I was already using automated pricing software to ensure that my unit stayed competitive every hour of every day. Now, most people try to eyeball the market on Airbnb directly and they guess. They leave money on the table because they're trying to outthink an algorithm. I used a data-driven protocol to out-earn the competition from the jump. I didn't want to relearn the business every time I added a new unit. I wanted a system that would simply grow as I grew. By May 2023, the first pivot happened. A family member owned a condo and told me that if I covered the rent, they didn't care what I did with the property. And this was my very first taste of rental arbitrage. I didn't even know there was a name for it at the time. I just knew that the math was undeniable. I wasn't tied to a mortgage, yet I was generating a spread. By October of 2023, a friend referred me to a homeowner who was struggling to get his house rented out. I sat him down and explained my protocol, how I manage the guests, how I maintain the showroom quality of the asset, and how his rent would be guaranteed. He agreed. Between those two units, I had officially moved from accidental host to arbitrage operator. I had learned the skill of talking to landlords and explaining the value proposition. Once I had that script and my automated systems were already running on the background operations, I turned up the heat. I stopped waiting for referrals and I started intentional prospecting. I started to make connections. I also started to cold call landlords. I treated it like the high-level agency work that I was doing at the Pentagon. But this time, I was the one that was owning all of the results. In just 4 months, between October and February 2024, I went from 3 units to 10. That was the exit point. In February 2024, exactly 15 months after I started, I walked into my job and I quit the federal government. Now, I didn't leave because I was chasing a dream. I left because with 10 units, my time was now worth more than the government was willing to pay me. Staying with the federal government has started to become a net loss. When the math shows you that you're losing money by staying at your secure job, the only logical move is to fire the job. Now look, I'm not telling you my story to brag. I'm telling you because 2 years ago, I was sitting at a patrol car at the Pentagon wondering if this was really it. And now I'm here running my own business on my own time. If you're watching this and you're in the same spot right now, working a job that pays the bills but doesn't feed your soul, just know it doesn't have to be your whole story. This channel is for you. I'm going to show you exactly how I did it and how you can do it too. Please subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss a single video. This is just the beginning. I'll see you guys in the next one.